Hello and welcome to Overlooked Gems. In this series I will be looking at games that fail to set the charts alight yet have something of a cult following. Or in some cases, games that did sell well but were unfairly trashed upon release. A good example of the latter being Luigi's Mansion, although it has recently seen a resurgence in popularity. With Overlooked Gems I will be asking a simple question. Is the game a true gem, or was it overlooked for good reason? I won't be covering new releases with this series, but instead will be going through the archives and looking at games from the past. My criteria is that a game must be at least a year old and not that well known to the wider gaming public. Now, I'm not making any bold claims about how successful a game was or wasn't, so if I'm covering one of your favourites, don't take offence. Instead, I'm hoping that these reviews will either inspire you to play a game that has been off your radar for a bit, or will actually educate you about a game that you've never even heard of. Or in the case of a game that was overlooked for a good reason, you'll know to stay away. So without further ado, let's see if today's game really is an overlooked gem. Majin and the Forsaken Kingdom. The Japanese developer Game Republic isn't known for its quality output. Its most notable releases such as Folklore, Clash of the Titans, Knight's Contract and Genji Days of the Blade range from legendarily poor to somewhat mediocre. When they announced Majin and the Forsaken Kingdom, looking every inch as cynical, if pretty cashing on The Last Guardian's small person meets big monster idea, the press naturally scoffed and then ignored it. What emerged, however, was a charming, well-designed game that didn't set the sales charts alight, but boasts the elusive magic that has evaded most of Game Republic's output. Majin tells the story of a thief, named by the Majin as Tepeyu, and the Majin himself, Teotl. A mysterious darkness has ravaged the land, destroying forests, poisoning water and gradually killing the world. When Tepeyu finds Teotl trapped in a castle, he rescues the lumbering giant and together they explore the land in a bid to destroy the darkness. And what a pretty land it is! While the graphics are not necessarily the sharpest or most detailed, they are stylized enough to evoke the dreamlike quality of the Sands of Time and Ico. The fiery mines smoulder with high contrast and an oppressive orange glow, while the forest regions are bright, open and alive. The only negative aspect of the environment's design is that it is highly deceptive. As expansive as some regions appear, stretching out into the distance and hinting at Xenoblade levels of exploration, you will be kept in a narrow area by plentiful invisible walls. Even ledges that are within easy jumping distance prove to be out of bounds to the aspiring adventurer, which is at odds with the game's desire to have you explore, especially when it tells you how many hidden items are in each room. And yet, this doesn't matter one jot, because the game's main attraction is its puzzles. While none of them are as mind-bending as Portal's best, the game constantly serves up a variety of puzzles that can involve anything from Tepeyu simply climbing to a ledge to pull a switch, to more involved puzzles that involve changing the environment. Each puzzle revolves around getting Teotl to the other end of the room so that he can open the door to the next, which is something that Tepeyu cannot do himself, making me wonder how people used to get around without a margin of their own. The best puzzles, though, involve creative use of Teotl's skills and strength. While early puzzles will make sparing use of Teotl's brawn, he will soon encounter giant fruit that grant him new powers, such as electricity that can power machines, and the ability to consume and breathe fire. While it would be stretching things to say that these puzzles are wildly original, they are involving and provide enough variety that the puzzle sections never get boring. The same cannot be said of combat, however. While the game's enemies, the darkness, can be subdued by Tepeyu, in a straight fight it takes an awful lot to put one down, and they will inevitably rise again. Tepeyu can use weapons or a stealthy back attack to make short work of these foes, but only Teotl can dispatch them permanently. It is seldom worth the effort to use these environmental traps though, and you will soon find yourself sending Teotl headlong into battle because he can overcome most situations. Unfortunately, if you do wade in to help him, you will usually just end up getting in the way, knocking enemies out of Teotl's reach when he may have finished them off and saved you valuable time. The only time Tepeyu is of use in combat is when the enemy is stunned, and in these situations he can initiate a double team attack with the press of B. Otherwise, combat is little more than spamming X. Later battles can also pose a problem. As the enemy swarms increase, Teotl will occasionally ignore instructions to focus on a particular enemy in favour of his allies. The problem is that in a lot of cases the lead enemy will spawn new subordinates until you kill him, meaning that Teotl's stubbornness can give rise to an infinite army of soldiers until he sees sense. It doesn't help that the targeting system for selecting enemies is somewhat flaky, somehow picking out distant targets rather than nearby enemies. Combat is overall the weakest part of the game. It is repetitive, unpolished and feels like a chore. Of course, the game would have been dull without enemies, but perhaps a more considered Ico-style approach or a more fluid Prince of Persia-style combat system would have helped. The only time combat is truly enjoyable is with boss battles. While they can bring out the worst in Teotl's AI, and he will occasionally stand totally still and ignore commands, it is a rare occurrence. When Teotl is behaving, these fights are more like dynamic puzzles that require keen use of his latest powers to weaken the villain and to allow Tepeyu to land the killing blow. After you know what you're doing, these battles can be over very quickly, but isn't that always the case with a puzzle game? Speaking of Teotl, his controls are nice and simple. Holding the R trigger will bring up his command list, with each action mapped to the face buttons. He has the option to follow, act, which is context sensitive, wait, and feed, which sees Tepeyu feeding him a healing fruit, which I'll speak about later. To use Teotl's abilities in combat, you need to hold the right bumper, which brings up a similar menu, but with the abilities rather than actions mapped to the buttons. The health system is quite clever in that Teotl can only be healed by fruit or by encountering a big tree. While there is a lot of healing fruit dotted around the game, as well as a limited number of other fruit, Tepeyu can only hold 5 at any one time, which does encourage you to use them sparingly. Tepeyu, on the other hand, can be healed at any time by Teotl, who will automatically absorb the darkness covering his body when nearby. This system works well as it reinforces the notion that you're responsible for Teotl's safety, while acknowledging that Tepeyu will take quite a beating. Moving on to character design, Tepeyu does look somewhat generic, resembling the cross between Disney's Aladdin and the Prince from Prince of Persia. But at least he does have unlockable costume pieces which allow for some form of customization. These costume pieces also grant buffs, such as reducing damage taken from certain enemy types or generating more life shards when enemies die, which gives the game a light RPG element, although you can quite happily complete the game without ever paying attention to the costume skills. But at least there are benefits for those who do. Teotl for his part looks like a giant muppet and is both charming in his befuddled expressions and intimidating in his size and strength.
Hungry.
The life shards mentioned before also play into the RPG aspect. Tepeyu can level up when he collects enough blue shards, and his health and strength increase accordingly, while red shards boost the friendship between the two. As the levels increase, new team-up attacks are unlocked, which do help battles progress more smoothly, but not by much. Another nice aspect of the game design is that as Teotl's abilities increase, you will remember areas that were previously inaccessible, and can revisit them to find that you can now explore them in full, discovering skill upgrades, costume pieces, and other bonus items. These areas are usually optional, and are a fine reward for the more adventurous player, especially as the question marks that denote how many items are still uncollected will haunt you if you don't. However, such is the layout of the game's world that returning to these areas will take a long time, especially as Teotl moves very slowly and has a habit of falling over a lot. The first time it's cute, but by the 100th time it becomes a grating annoyance that piles on top of the other little annoying things that the game does, like deciding that the duo will perform a celebratory dance for a minor success, even when you're in a hurry to get a door open before enemies respawn, or the constant repetition of a speech clip. "Get on my back, get to high place," still echoes through my nightmares. Another issue with Teotl has to do with his pathfinding skills. There are obviously areas that he cannot access due to his size, which is fair enough. However, he sometimes refuses to pass through gaps that are large enough to accommodate him, which can kill the flow of a puzzle solution, as it can be difficult to tell if this is a bug or intentional. This kind of ambiguity is unwelcome in a puzzle game. He also seems to take glee in traipsing through puddles of darkness that incapacitate him, even though most of the time there's a clear path around them. This is not just a problem in combat, although you would think he'd know to stay out of the goo while fighting. It can waste minutes when you're waiting for him to open a door, and he insists on wandering around covered in tar like some sort of disobedient dog. Teotl isn't the only one with problems though. Tepeyu's platforming skills are somewhat fiddly. It's largely due to his turning circle being quite large and twitchy, and that he needs a run-up to clear even the smallest gaps. What follows is Tepeyu landing too close to the edge of a platform to make the next jump, then spinning around too far and falling off the other side, or performing a very feeble jump and having to do the whole thing again. Thankfully, these platforming sections are few and far between, but one section near the end of the game does lead to frustrating and inevitable death should you fail. However, these annoyances are minor and easy to forgive when the game is largely successful in its ambition. The boss battles are great fun, and the world is a joy to explore, and the puzzles keep coming up with new tricks to work the grey matter, even if they're not usually that difficult. But best of all, the game exudes an infectious charm that warms the heart and makes it far more than the sum of its parts. Majin is a series of contradictions. It's rough but pretty, unpolished but well designed. It's maddening yet compulsive, and it is most definitely a gem. A gem that is easy to love despite its faults because it feels like it was made from the heart. And it's definitely got a lot of heart.
I did great!